The snow was 3 feet deep when Sarah Chen first saw the cabin that would change her life forever. Hidden in the remote Montana mountains, the structure looked more like a tomb than a home. Windows shattered, roof caving in, walls covered in decades of ice and neglect. With only $847 to her name and a baby growing inside her, she had nowhere else to go. Her family's ultimatum still rang in her ears: choose the baby or choose us. She'd chosen her child, and they'd chosen to erase her completely. But what her family didn't know was that before Sarah became the disappointing daughter who got pregnant out of wedlock, she was the MIT-trained architect who designed million-dollar homes across the country. What they'd forgotten was that she'd learned to build with her grandfather's weathered hands before she ever touched a blueprint. As she stood before that frozen cabin, something stirred inside her, a vision that would transform not just this broken place, but everything people thought they knew about what she was capable of. Could a woman with nothing but determination and hidden skills really turn this icy wasteland into a sanctuary that would make her family beg for forgiveness? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah's breath formed crystalline clouds as she trudged through the knee-deep powder, her designer boots, a remnant from her former life, offering little protection against the Montana cold. The property deed in her pocket, purchased sight unseen from a distressed seller online, had cost her nearly half her remaining money. The grainy photos hadn't captured the full extent of the decay, but they also hadn't revealed the cabin's surprising size or its commanding view of the valley below. The wind whipped through the broken windows with a mournful howl, but Sarah heard something else: potential. Her architect's eye automatically catalogued the structure: solid log foundation, good bones despite the surface damage, and positioned perfectly to catch both morning light and afternoon warmth once the snow melted. The roof was bad, catastrophically so, but the walls were salvageable. She pushed open the door, which hung at an odd angle on rusted hinges. Inside, everything was worse than she'd imagined. Decades of accumulated snow had melted and refrozen countless times, creating a landscape of ice formations that transformed the interior into something resembling a cave. Icicles hung like frozen daggers from the ceiling beams. The floorboards, where visible beneath the ice, were warped and stained. But Sarah saw past the destruction. In her mind, she began sketching improvements: reinforced beams, energy-efficient windows, a stone fireplace where the old metal stove sat rusted and abandoned. She could envision warm light spilling from those windows onto fresh snow, smoke curling from a properly constructed chimney. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister Emma: "Mom wanted me to check if you'd come to your senses yet. It's not too late to fix this." Fix this. As if her pregnancy was a problem to be solved, her unborn child a mistake to be erased. Sarah deleted the message without responding and slipped the phone back into her pocket. The baby kicked, a gentle flutter that reminded her why she was here. At 4 months, her pregnancy was just beginning to show, but the morning sickness had finally subsided. She pressed her gloved hand to her stomach through her thick coat. "What do you think?" she whispered. "Think we can make this work?" Another kick, stronger this time, and Sarah chose to interpret it as enthusiastic approval. The nearest town, Glacier Falls, was 30 miles down a winding mountain road. She'd passed a hardware store, a small grocery, and what looked like a lumber yard. Her $847 wouldn't go far, but she'd noticed plenty of deadfall in the surrounding forest, free firewood and maybe even salvageable lumber if she was careful. As the afternoon light began to fade, Sarah made her way back to her car, a 10-year-old Honda Civic that had seen better days but was reliable enough to get her here. She'd loaded it with everything she owned: clothes, a few tools, her grandfather's old carpentry chest, and a sleeping bag rated for sub-zero temperatures. Tonight she'd stay in the motel in Glacier Falls, Tomorrow she'd begin the impossible task of making this frozen wasteland livable before her money ran out completely. She took one last look at the cabin, imagining it transformed. Windows glowing warmly against the white landscape. A porch where she could sit with her morning coffee and watch the sunrise paint the mountains pink and gold. A nursery with handcrafted furniture and windows positioned perfectly to catch the afternoon light. Her family thought they'd broken her by cutting her off. They'd expected her to come crawling back, apologetic and defeated. Instead, she was going to build something magnificent from nothing, with her own hands and her grandfather's wisdom guiding her. The Chen family fortune had been built on real estate development. Soon, Sarah would show them what real building looked like. The silence hit her first, not the absence of sound, but its complete transformation. No honking horns, no subway rumble, no distant sirens painting the background of city life. Just whined through pine needles and the crunch of gravel beneath her rental car's tires as she followed the barely there road deeper into the Montana wilderness. Maya's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as the path narrowed, her architect's eye automatically cataloguing the engineering challenges of maintaining a road this remote. 6 months ago, she would have been in her corner office overlooking downtown Seattle, sketching preliminary designs for another glass tower. Now she was following directions scrawled on a gas station napkin, chasing down a property listing that existed only in the memory of a local realtor who'd inherited it from his grandfather. The baby kicked, a gentle flutter that made her breath catch. At 5 months, these movements still surprised her. Tiny reminders that her life had veered so far off course that GPS couldn't recalculate fast enough. She pressed one hand briefly to her belly, then returned it to the wheel as the car bounced through another pothole. When the trees finally parted, revealing her destination, Maya's foot found the brake without conscious thought. The cabin crouched in the clearing like something from a fairy tale gone wrong. Weathered logs had turned silver grey, and the roof sagged in the middle where decades of snow had tested its resolve. One shutter hung askew, giving the single front window a perpetually winking expression. The porch steps had surrendered to gravity and time, collapsing into a neat pile of rotting timber. It was a disaster. It was perfect. Maya turned off the engine and sat in the sudden quiet, studying the bones of the structure with professional interest. The foundation looked solid, local stone, built to last. The log construction was traditional, probably dating back to the 1940s based on the chinking style. Underneath the neglect, she could see good craftsmanship, the kind that came from builders who expected their work to outlive them. She eased out of the car, one hand supporting her lower back where pregnancy had already begun to change her center of gravity. The mountain air was thin and sharp, carrying scents of pine sap and wild grass that made her lungs feel cleaner just breathing it. The front door was locked, but the key was exactly where the realtor had promised, under the third stone from the left edge of the collapsed steps. Maya picked her way carefully through the debris, noting which boards might be salvageable, which would need replacing. Even in crisis, her mind automatically inventoried materials and measured angles. The door opened with a groan of protest, revealing an interior that somehow managed to be both worse and better than she'd expected. Worse because everything was covered in a fine layer of dust and mouse droppings, and a bird had clearly been living in the main room for some time. Better because the space flowed naturally, with sightlines that drew the eye toward what had once been picture windows facing west toward the mountains. Maya walked slowly through the 2 main rooms and tiny kitchen, her footsteps echoing on warped hardwood floors. Someone had loved this place once. She could see it in the careful placement of built-in shelves, in the river stones arranged around a massive fireplace, in the way the rooms were positioned to capture both morning and evening light. In the back bedroom, she found evidence of the cabin's last inhabitant, a stack of journals on the windowsill, their leather covers soft with age. Maya opened the top one carefully, revealing pages of careful handwriting. The first entry was dated 30 years ago, June 15th. Tom finished the new window today. I can lie in bed now and watch the sunrise paint the peaks pink. He says we'll add the sunroom next spring, but I told him this is already perfect. Sometimes perfect doesn't need improving. Maya closed the journal gently, feeling like she was intruding on intimate moments. But something about those words resonated in her chest, the idea that perfect could be simple, that it didn't require corner offices or family approval or 5-year plans. She walked back to the main room and stood in the center, turning slowly to take in the full scope of what she was considering. The silence felt different now, not empty, but expectant, waiting. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother, "Maya, please reconsider. We can work something out. This foolishness has gone on long enough." Maya looked at the message, then at the dusty room around her, then out the broken window toward mountains that stretched endlessly into blue sky. For the first time in months, she knew exactly what she wanted to do. She deleted the text without responding and called the realtor. "I'll take it," she said when he answered. "Cash offer, as discussed." The baby kicked again, and Maya smiled. The morning light filtering through the grimy windows revealed the true scope of what Sarah had gotten herself into. What had seemed like rustic charm in the fading evening light now looked more like a disaster waiting to collapse. Water stains bloomed across the ceiling like abstract art, and she could see daylight through gaps in the chinking between the logs. A family of mice had clearly been the cabin's most recent tenants, evidenced by the droppings scattered across every surface. Sarah sat on her makeshift bed, a sleeping bag spread over the least sagging section of the old couch, and placed both hands on her still flat stomach. 6 weeks along, according to her calculations, 6 weeks since that night with Marcus, that had seemed so right until everything went so catastrophically wrong. The memory of her father's face when she'd told them still made her chest tighten with a familiar mixture of hurt and defiance. "You've made your choice," he'd said, his voice cold as January granite. "Now live with the consequences." Well, here she was, living with them in the most literal sense possible. Standing up, Sarah surveyed her new domain with an architect's eye. The structure was solid, that much she could determine from the way the logs had settled. The foundation stones were still properly aligned, and despite the obvious neglect, the basic bones of the cabin were good. More than good, actually. Someone had built this place to last. She pulled on her boots and stepped outside, breathing in air so clean it almost made her lightheaded after months of city living. The property stretched down to a creek she could hear babbling somewhere beyond the trees, and the morning sun painted the distant mountains in shades of gold and amber that no photograph could capture. Her phone had exactly 1 bar of service, enough for a text from her sister Claire that had come through sometime during the night. "Dad's furious you took the truck. Says he's calling it stolen." Sarah typed back with numb fingers, "Tell him to call the police then. I'll be waiting." But even as she sent it, she knew he wouldn't follow through. Harold Brennan might be willing to disown his daughter, but he wasn't ready for the public scandal of having her arrested. His reputation meant too much for that kind of messy family drama to make the papers. The next few hours passed in a blur of inventory and planning. The cabin had running water, cold only, but it ran clear from the tap. The wood-burning stove looked functional once she cleared out the bird's nest from the chimney. Most importantly, the electrical panel showed signs of relatively recent updates, probably done by the same person who'd installed the modern deadbolt on the front door. Someone had loved this place once. Sarah could see it in the careful way the corner shelving had been built, in the hand-carved wooden handles on the kitchen cabinets, in the wide front porch designed to catch both sunrise and sunset. The abandonment felt recent, as if the previous occupant had left with every intention of returning. By noon, she'd compiled a mental list of immediate needs: cleaning supplies, basic tools, food that didn't require refrigeration, and something to do about the holes in her temporary shelter before the next mountain storm rolled through. The drive back to town felt like traveling between worlds, from her wild, uncertain future back to civilization, with all its judgments and expectations. The hardware store clerk, a weathered man named Pete, who looked like he'd been carved from the same granite as the mountains, took her list without comment. But when she asked about hiring someone to help with repairs, His eyebrows climbed toward his receding hairline. "You're staying out at the old Henderson place?" he asked, scratching his graying beard. "That cabin's been empty for near 3 years now. Last fellow who tried to fix it up got halfway through and gave up when winter hit." "I'm not giving up," Sarah said, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. Pete studied her for a long moment, taking in her designer jeans and manicured nails that were already showing signs of her morning's work. "You know anything about cabin living, miss?" "I know about building things that last," she replied. "And I know about making the best of what you have to work with." Something in her tone must have convinced him, because Pete nodded slowly. "Tell you what, I'll throw in some advice for free. You're going to need a lot more than what's on this list if you plan to make it through a Montana winter. And if you're serious about this, there's a fellow named Jake Morrison who does good work. Fair prices too. Lost his construction job when the development project up north got cancelled." Sarah added Jake Morrison's number to her growing list of lifelines, feeling something she hadn't experienced in weeks: hope. Maybe she was crazy for thinking she could make this work. Maybe she was just a spoiled rich girl playing at self-sufficiency. But standing in that hardware store, planning for a future she was going to build with her own hands, Sarah felt more like herself than she had in months. The morning sun filtered through the grimy windows, casting geometric patterns across the cabin's warped floorboards. Sarah stood in the doorway, coffee mug in hand, surveying what would become her temporary kingdom. 3 days had passed since her impulsive purchase, and the initial shock of her new reality was slowly crystallizing into something resembling determination. She'd spent the previous evening sketching by lamplight, her architect's eye automatically cataloguing structural possibilities. The cabin's bones were surprisingly solid. Thick pine logs chinked with aged mortar, a stone foundation that had weathered decades without shifting. What it lacked in amenities, it made up for in potential. The baby fluttered, a whisper-soft reminder of the timeline she was working against. 5 months to transform this place into something livable before winter set in with Montana's legendary brutality. 5 months to prove to herself that she could build something meaningful from nothing. Sarah pulled her phone from her pocket, surprised to find 2 bars of signal. Her fingers hovered over her mother's contact before she caught herself. 3 days of radio silence from her family felt both eternal and strangely liberating. No judgment, no disappointed sighs, no subtle reminders of how thoroughly she'd derailed their carefully orchestrated expectations. Instead, she scrolled through local contractors' websites, making notes about lumber yards and supply stores. A savings account, while substantial enough for the cabin purchase, would require careful management. Every decision would need to balance necessity against budget, form against function. A truck's rumble echoed through the trees, growing closer. Sarah stepped onto the porch, shielding her eyes against the morning glare. A battered blue pickup wound through the forest path, kicking up dust clouds in its wake. Her nearest neighbor, perhaps, or someone curious about the city woman who'd bought the old Henderson place. The truck stopped near her rental car, and a man emerged, tall, weathered, with the kind of easy confidence that came from years of physical work. Dark hair escaped from beneath a worn baseball cap, and when he smiled, crow's feet crinkled at the corners of warm brown eyes. "You must be the new owner," he called, approaching with an unhurried gait. "I'm Jake Morrison. I live about 2 miles down the mountain." Sarah Chen. She descended the porch steps, noting the calluses on his extended hand, the paint stains on his flannel shirt. "Nice to meet you. Heard through the grapevine that someone finally bought this place. Harold Henderson built it back in the 70s, lived here until he passed 5 years ago. Good man." Jake's gaze swept over the cabin with professional assessment. "She's got potential, but you're looking at serious work before winter." "I'm aware." Sarah crossed her arms, defensive despite his neutral tone. "I'm an architect. I know what I'm getting into." Something shifted in Jake's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or reassessment. "Architect from where?" "Chicago." The word felt strange on her tongue now, like claiming citizenship to a country she'd abandoned, long way from home. His observation carried no judgment, just acknowledgement of an obvious truth. This is home now. The conviction in her voice surprised them both. Jake nodded slowly, studying her face with new interest. Well, if you're serious about making this place livable, you'll need help. The nearest hardware store is 40 minutes down the mountain, and they close at 5 sharp. Lumber yards even farther. Winter comes early up here. September if you're unlucky, October if you're not. Sarah felt a flutter of panic beneath her carefully maintained composure. Are you offering to help or just pointing out how impossible this is? Bit of both, maybe. Jake's smile was disarming. I'm a contractor when I'm not ranching, done plenty of restoration work. If you're looking for someone who knows these mountains and won't try to talk you out of whatever brought you here, I'm your guy. The baby kicked, a sharp reminder of secrets she wasn't ready to share. But Jake's steady presence felt reassuring in a way that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with competence. She needed someone who could help her build something lasting, something real. What would you charge? She asked. Depends on the scope. Why don't you show me around, tell me what you're thinking, and we'll figure out a fair rate. Sarah hesitated at the threshold, suddenly aware of how intimate it felt to invite someone into her barely begun sanctuary. But practicality won over privacy. She needed help, and Jake Morrison seemed like the kind of man who kept his word. Fair warning, she said, pushing open the cabin door. I have big plans for this place. Jake followed her inside, his boots echoing on the bare floors. Lady, anyone willing to take on a project like this obviously doesn't think small. I'm looking forward to seeing what an architect's imagination can do with Harold's old cabin. The morning sun filtered through the grimy windows as Sarah surveyed her domain with a mixture of pride and exhaustion. 3 weeks of relentless work had transformed the cabin's interior from a debris-filled relic into something resembling livable space. The old floorboards, once warped and stained, now gleamed with a warm honey finish after hours of sanding and oiling. She'd managed to clear out most of the rodent nests and patch the worst holes in the walls, though the place still carried the musty scent of decades-old memories. Her hands, once soft and manicured for client meetings, were now calloused and permanently stained with wood polish. The baby seemed to approve of all the activity, offering gentle kicks that had become her constant companion during the lonely work sessions. She'd taken to talking to her unborn child while she worked, explaining each repair as if teaching an eager apprentice. Today we're going to tackle the kitchen, she announced to her belly, running her palm over the growing curve. What do you think about open shelving instead of those rotting cabinets? The sound of an approaching engine cut through the morning stillness, causing her to freeze. She'd grown accustomed to the isolation, finding peace in the absence of human contact. Through the newly cleaned window, she watched a battered pickup truck navigate the overgrown path to her clearing. A man emerged from the vehicle, and Sarah's breath caught. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and forearms that spoke of physical labor. He moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in the wilderness, his boots finding sure footing on the uneven ground. She opened the door before he could knock, pregnancy making her slightly off balance as she stepped onto the small porch she'd reinforced just days earlier. "Morning," he said, his voice carrying a slight rasp that made her think of campfires and whiskey. "I'm Jake Morrison. I own the property that borders yours to the east." Sarah nodded, suddenly conscious of her appearance. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her clothes were covered in sawdust. Sarah Chen. "I didn't realize anyone lived out here." "Most people don't venture this far into nowhere," Jake replied, his grey eyes taking in the improvements she'd made to the cabin's exterior. "I was checking my fence line and saw smoke from your chimney. Wanted to make sure everything was all right." "Everything's fine," she said quickly, then felt compelled to add, "I'm renovating the place." Jake's gaze lingered on her pregnant form with what seemed like concern rather than judgment. "That's quite a project to tackle alone. This old place has been empty for, 20 years? Closer to 30 from what I can tell." Sarah found herself relaxing slightly. There was something reassuring about his presence, though she couldn't pinpoint why. The previous owner left it to me. I'm an architect, so I thought I'd fix it up. An architect, he repeated, impressed. That explains the professional-looking repairs. Mind if I take a look at what you've done? Sarah hesitated, then stepped aside. The cabin was small enough that his presence seemed to fill every corner as he examined her work. He ran his hands along the restored beams with obvious appreciation. "This is remarkable craftsmanship," he said, crouching to examine the floorboard repairs. "You've got real skill with restoration work." Pride swelled in her chest at his praise. It had been months since anyone had acknowledged her abilities without immediately questioning her life choices. "The foundation needs work, though," she admitted, "and I'm not sure about the electrical situation." Jake stood, brushing dust from his hands. "I do construction work in town during the slow season. If you need help with the heavy stuff, I'd be happy to lend a hand. Neighbors should look out for each other out here." The offer surprised her. "I couldn't ask you to." "You didn't ask," I offered. His smile was easy, genuine. "Besides, it's not often I get to work on a project with actual architectural planning behind it. Most of my jobs involve fixing what weekend warriors tried to build themselves." Sarah found herself smiling back. "I suppose I could use some help with the foundation work." "Great. I'll bring my tools over tomorrow morning, if that works for you." As he headed back to his truck, Sarah called after him. "Jake? Thank you. For not asking questions, I mean." He paused, one hand on the truck door. "Everyone's got their reasons for ending up in places like this. Questions don't usually help much." After his truck disappeared into the trees, Sarah stood on her porch, listening to the returning silence. For the first time since arriving at the cabin, she didn't feel quite so alone. The baby kicked, as if in agreement, and she placed both hands on her belly. "Looks like we might have found ourselves a friend," she whispered. The sound of hammering echoed through the pine trees as Maya adjusted her grip on the worn handle. 3 weeks of steady work had transformed the cabin's exterior from a weathered grey to something approaching livable. The new shingles she'd managed to haul up from town gleamed honey gold in the afternoon sun, and the porch no longer sagged like a tired old man's shoulders. Her hands had grown calloused and strong, though her back ached constantly. The pregnancy wasn't making the physical labor any easier, but she'd learned to work in shorter bursts, taking frequent breaks to sip water and nibble the crackers that seemed to be the only thing her stomach could tolerate in the mornings. "Well, aren't you a sight?" Maya spun around, hammer raised instinctively. A woman stood at the edge of the clearing, maybe 60 years old, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun. She wore faded jeans and boots that had seen real work, and her weathered hands rested casually on her hips. "Sorry to startle you," the woman said, raising her hands peacefully. "I'm Ruth Morrison. I live about 2 miles down the mountain. Been hearing the hammering for weeks now, and figured I should come see what fool was trying to resurrect this old place." Maya lowered the hammer but kept it in her grip. "Maya Chen, and I'm probably the fool you're looking for." Ruth's eyes crinkled with amusement as she surveyed the work Maya had accomplished. "Fool might be too strong a word. You've done more with this place in a few weeks than anyone has in 20 years. Though I have to ask, you planning to stay through winter?" The question hit Maya like a physical blow. She'd been so focused on making the cabin habitable that she hadn't fully considered what Montana winter might mean. Yes, I think so." "Honey," Ruth's voice carried a gentle warning. "This place gets 20 feet of snow. The road becomes impassable. You'd be completely cut off for months." Maya felt her carefully constructed sense of security begin to crumble. "I have supplies, and I'm learning to—" "To what? Chop enough firewood to heat this place when it's 40 below? You know anything about winterizing pipes, about what happens when the power lines go down in an ice storm?" The criticism stung because it was valid. Maya had been thinking like someone playing house, not someone actually trying to survive in the wilderness. Her architectural training had taught her about building codes and structural integrity, not about the brutal realities of mountain living. "Look," Ruth continued, her tone softening, "I'm not trying to scare you off, but I've lived up here my whole life, and I've seen people make dangerous mistakes because they romanticized what this place demands." Maya sank onto the porch steps, suddenly exhausted. "I don't really have anywhere else to go." Something in her voice must have conveyed more than she intended, because Ruth's expression shifted from concern to understanding. The older woman approached slowly and settled beside her on the steps. "Running from something or running to something?" "Both. Neither. I don't know anymore." Maya found herself talking to this stranger in a way she hadn't talked to anyone in months. "I lost everything. Family, career, the life I thought I was building, and now I'm pregnant and completely alone, trying to convince myself I can build something new out here." Ruth was quiet for a long moment, studying the mountains that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. "My husband brought me up here 42 years ago. City girl, didn't know a thing about country living. First winter nearly killed me, literally. I got pneumonia, we were snowed in for 6 weeks, and I swore I'd leave as soon as the thaw came." "What changed your mind?" "Realized I wasn't just learning to survive the mountain. I was learning to survive, period. This place strips away everything that doesn't matter and shows you what you're really made of. But it doesn't do it gently, and it doesn't care if you're ready." Maya placed a protective hand over her barely visible bump. "So you think I should leave?" "I think you should get realistic about what staying means. If you're serious about making this work, you need help. Real help, not just good intentions and a hammer." Ruth stood and dusted off her jeans. "My husband Jack and we're getting on in years. Could use some help around our place in exchange for teaching you what you need to know. You could stay in our guest room through the winter, learn the ropes. Come spring, if you still want to tackle this place, you'll actually have a fighting chance." The offer hung in the air between them like a lifeline Maya hadn't known she needed. Pride warred with practicality, independence with survival instinct. "I'll think about it," Maya said finally. Ruth nodded. "Don't think too long. First snow usually comes early October, and that's only 6 weeks away. Whatever you decide, decide it while you still have options." As Ruth disappeared back into the trees, Maya looked at her partially renovated cabin with new eyes. It wasn't the sanctuary she'd imagined. It was a challenge she might not be ready to face. The morning brought with it a peculiar sound that pulled Sarah from the deepest sleep she'd experienced in months. Through the cabin's single window, she could see nothing but white, a thick blanket of snow that had transformed her world overnight. The sound came again, a rhythmic thudding against the cabin's exterior wall. She wrapped herself in the quilt she'd found in the trunk and padded to the door. The cold hit her like a physical force as she cracked it open, and there, methodically splitting wood with practiced swings, stood a man she'd never seen before. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a heavy flannel shirt and work boots that had seen better decades. When he noticed her watching, he paused mid-swing and touched the brim of his worn baseball cap. "Ma'am, didn't mean to wake you. Name's Jake Morrison. I live about 2 miles that way." He gestured vaguely toward the tree line. "Been keeping an eye on this place since old Henry passed. Saw smoke from your chimney yesterday." Sarah pulled the quilt tighter around herself, suddenly conscious of her rumpled appearance and the obvious swell of her belly beneath the fabric. "I'm sorry, I didn't know anyone was... I thought it was abandoned." "It was. Henry was my great-uncle. Left the place to me, but I already got more land than I know what to do with." Jake resumed his chopping, the axe splitting the logs with satisfying cracks. "Figured someone might as well get some use out of it through the winter." The casual generosity of the statement left Sarah speechless. She watched him work, noting the efficiency of his movements, the way he seemed completely at home in this harsh landscape that still felt alien to her. "You planning on staying through the snow season?" he asked without looking up. Yes, I think so." Jake nodded as if this were the most natural thing in the world. Then you'll be needing more than what's in that woodshed. This storm's just the beginning. He worked for another hour while Sarah watched from the doorway, occasionally retreating inside to warm herself by the fire. When he finished, there was enough split wood stacked against the cabin to last her weeks. "There's a generator in the shed out back," he said, shouldering his axe. "Might want to get familiar with it before the next storm hits. And that chimney could use some work before it gets much colder." "I don't know how to thank you," Sarah began, but Jake was already shaking his head. "Don't need thanks, just being neighborly." He paused, studying her face with eyes the color of storm clouds. "You running from something?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. In her previous life, people danced around personal topics with careful politeness, but there was something about Jake's manner, straightforward without being invasive, that made her want to answer honestly. "Everything," she said quietly. He nodded again, as if this too made perfect sense. "Well, this is a good place for it. Been doing some running of my own." Before she could ask what he meant, he was already walking away, his boots crunching through the snow with sure steps. At the edge of the clearing, he turned back. "Storm's supposed to break tomorrow. I'll come by in a few days, show you how to work that generator." "And Sarah?" She startled at the sound of her name, though she couldn't remember telling it to him. Montana winters aren't forgiving to folks who aren't prepared, but they're fair to those who are. After he disappeared into the trees, Sarah stood in the doorway for a long time, watching the snow continue to fall. The silence felt different now, less isolating and more peaceful. For the first time since arriving at the cabin, she didn't feel completely alone in the wilderness. She spent the rest of the day exploring her temporary home with new eyes, taking inventory of what she had and what she needed. In the shed, she found the generator Jake had mentioned, along with tools she didn't recognize and supplies that spoke of a life lived simply but thoughtfully. That evening, as she sat by the fire sketching rough plans for improvements to the cabin's layout, she found herself thinking about Jake's parting words. She'd spent so much of her life trying to meet other people's expectations, trying to fit into spaces that were never quite the right shape for who she was. Her family's wealth had provided comfort, but also constraints, invisible walls that dictated how she should live, whom she should marry, what kind of future she should want. The baby shifted inside her, and she placed her hand over the movement. Here, in this simple cabin surrounded by wilderness, those walls felt very far away. Here, she was beginning to understand, she could build something different, something that was entirely her own. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in quiet possibility. The morning brought an unexpected visitor along with the first heavy snowfall of the season. Sarah was sketching plans for a root cellar when she heard the distant rumble of an engine fighting its way up the mountain road. Through the frosted window, she watched a battered pickup truck emerge from the white curtain of falling snow, its headlights cutting through the early dawn gloom. A hand instinctively moved to her belly, now noticeably rounded at 5 months. Few people knew about this place, and fewer still would attempt the treacherous drive in weather like this. The truck's door slammed shut, and a figure in a heavy coat trudged through the deepening snow toward her cabin. "Sarah Montgomery, you are one hard woman to find." The voice made her freeze. Detective Ray Collins stood on her porch, snow collecting on his shoulders, his weathered face serious but not unkind. She'd known Ray since childhood. He'd been her father's golf partner before everything fell apart. "Ray." She opened the door wider, stepping back. "What brings you all the way up here?" He stomped the snow from his boots before entering, his eyes taking in the transformed space with obvious surprise. "This is incredible, Sarah. When I heard you were living in some abandoned cabin, I expected—" He gestured around the warm, beautifully crafted interior. "Not this. Coffee, please." He settled into one of the chairs she'd built from reclaimed wood. "Your mother sent me." Sarah's hand stilled on the coffee pot. "Oh. She's been trying to find you for weeks. Finally hired a private investigator who tracked you this far." Ray accepted the steaming mug gratefully. She wants to see you, Sarah, to talk. After what she said, after what they both said. Sarah's voice carried the weight of months of hurt. I think we said everything that needed saying. People say things in anger they don't mean. Ray's tone was gentle but persistent. She's your mother. That baby you're carrying is her grandchild. The baby she called a mistake? The grandchild she said would ruin the family name? Sarah's hand moved protectively to her belly. No, Ray, some things can't be unsaid. Ray leaned forward, his expression earnest. She's sick, Sarah. The words hit her like a physical blow. What? Ovarian cancer. Diagnosed 2 weeks after you left. She didn't want me to tell you, but... He shrugged. I've got daughters of my own. Some things are more important than pride. Sarah sank into her chair, the carefully built walls around her heart suddenly feeling fragile. How sick? Early stages. Treatment's going well, but it's been a wake-up call. Your father, too. He's been asking about you. Asking what, exactly? If you're safe, if you need anything, if the baby's healthy. Ray's eyes were kind but unflinching. I know they hurt you, Sarah. I know what they said was unforgivable. But families, sometimes they break before they learn how to bend. Sarah stood abruptly, moving to the window where she could see the snow falling heavier now, already covering Ray's tire tracks. You should go before the road becomes impassable. Come with me. No, just to see her, to talk. I said no, Ray. She turned back to him, and he could see the tears threatening despite her firm voice. I built something here, something that's mine, something good. I won't let them take that away from me. Ray studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I understand. But Sarah, pride is a cold companion on winter nights, and that baby deserves to know their family, even if that family's made some terrible mistakes. This baby will know love, Sarah said fiercely. Real love, not conditional love that disappears the moment you don't live up to someone's expectations. Your mother loves you. My mother loves the version of me that existed in her imagination. The successful architect with the perfect husband and the planned pregnancy and the pristine reputation. Sarah's voice broke slightly. She never loved the real me. Ray stood, setting down his empty mug. Maybe, or maybe she's learning the difference. He pulled a business card from his pocket and placed it on the table. Her number. Your father's too. They change their minds. They get up the courage to call. You won't have to wonder where to reach them. After Ray left, his truck disappearing back into the white wilderness, Sarah sat in her quiet cabin listening to the wind howl around the corners. She picked up the business card, her mother's familiar handwriting noting the phone number. Such a small thing to carry such enormous weight. Outside, the storm was intensifying, and she realized Ray might be the last person she'd see for weeks if the snow kept falling like this. The isolation she'd embraced suddenly felt different, heavier. Her hand moved to her belly where the baby had started moving regularly now, little flutters that reminded her she wasn't truly alone, but almost didn't count when storms came. The sound of splitting wood echoed through the crisp morning air as Maya brought the axe down with practiced precision. 6 weeks of daily chopping had transformed her soft architect's hands into something capable and strong. She paused to wipe sweat from her brow, her breath forming small clouds in the October chill, and surveyed the growing pile of firewood that would see her through the coming winter. The cabin behind her bore little resemblance to the crumbling structure she'd first discovered. New chinking filled the gaps between logs, the roof no longer leaked, and smoke curled steadily from the stone chimney she'd painstakingly rebuilt. What had once been a forgotten relic was becoming something beautiful, a testament to what determination and desperation could accomplish together. Her hand instinctively moved to her belly, now noticeably rounded beneath her flannel shirt. At nearly 5 months along, she could feel the baby's movements more frequently, gentle flutters that reminded her she wasn't entirely alone in this wilderness sanctuary. Dr. Chen in Whitefish had assured her during her last visit that everything was progressing normally, though she'd noticed his concerned glances at her calloused hands and the way her boots tracked mud across his pristine office floor. The rumble of an engine broke through the forest quiet, and Maya's pulse quickened. Few people knew about this place, and fewer still had reason to visit. She set down the axe and walked toward the clearing, shielding her eyes against the morning sun as a familiar blue pickup truck emerged from the tree line. Ben Calloway stepped out, his ranger uniform crisp despite the rough drive. He'd been checking on her weekly since that first awkward encounter, bringing supplies and news from town with an easy kindness that asked for nothing in return. Today, however, something in his expression seemed different, more serious, almost apologetic. "Morning, Maya." He reached into the truck bed and pulled out a box of groceries. "Brought those things you asked for and—" He hesitated, then retrieved a manila envelope. "This came to the ranger station addressed to you." Maya's stomach clenched as she recognized her mother's elegant handwriting. For weeks, she'd existed in a bubble where her former life felt like someone else's story. The envelope in Ben's weathered hands shattered that illusion completely. "I can take it back if you're not ready," he offered quietly. She shook her head and accepted the envelope, her fingers trembling slightly. "No, I need to face whatever this is." The paper felt heavy, weighted with implications she wasn't sure she wanted to understand. Ben carried the groceries inside while Maya stood in the clearing, turning the envelope over in her hands. Through the cabin's open door, she could hear him moving around her small kitchen, putting things away with the easy familiarity of someone who'd done this before. The domestic sound was oddly comforting. Finally, she tore open the seal. Inside was a formal legal document and a brief note in her mother's handwriting. The legalese was dense, but the meaning became clear as she read. Her trust fund, her inheritance, everything that had been frozen when they cut her off. It was being permanently transferred to her brother David, contingent on her signing away all claims to the family estate. Her mother's note was characteristically brief. "Maya, your father's health is declining. We cannot afford any complications regarding the estate. Sign these papers and we can all move forward. This is for the best. Mother." "Bad news." Ben's voice was gentle as he approached. Maya looked up, realizing tears were streaming down her cheeks. "They want me to sign away any claim to my inheritance, permanently." She handed him the letter, not caring any more about maintaining the careful boundaries they'd established. Ben read quickly, his jaw tightening. "What will you do?" "I don't know." The admission felt like stepping off a cliff. "That money, it was supposed to be my safety net, for the baby. I thought maybe someday when things settled down—" She gestured helplessly at the legal papers. "But they're making sure there's no going back. Maya." Ben's voice was firm. "Look around you. Really look." She followed his gaze to the cabin, smoke still curling from its chimney, to the neat stacks of firewood, the small garden she'd coaxed from the rocky soil, the life she'd built with her own hands. "You don't need their safety net," he continued. "You've built something better, something that's actually yours." As if responding to his words, the baby kicked strongly against her ribs. Maya pressed her hand to the spot, feeling the solid reality of new life, new possibilities. "You're right," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "I am." Without another word, she walked to the fire pit, struck a match, and watched her mother's ultimatum curl into ash. Some bridges were worth burning, especially when you'd already built something better on the other side. The sound of hammering echoed through the valley as Emma adjusted the last piece of reclaimed barnwood on the cabin's new front porch. 6 months had transformed both her and her sanctuary. The simple structure now boasted clean lines and thoughtful details that showcased her architectural training while respecting the wilderness around it. Solar panels gleamed on the south-facing roof, and a small wind turbine spun lazily in the mountain breeze. Her hands, once soft from city living, were now calloused and confident as they worked. The pregnancy had become more visible, her growing belly a constant reminder of the new life she was building in every sense. She'd learned to adapt her work around her changing body, taking more breaks and accepting help when Marcus offered it. Speaking of Marcus, his truck rumbled up the newly cleared path, just as she was stepping back to admire her handiwork. He'd been coming by more frequently, always with some excuse about checking the solar installation or bringing supplies. Today he carried a large cardboard box that sparked her curiosity. "Please tell me that's not more canned goods," she called out, wiping sawdust from her hands. "I'm starting to feel like a doomsday prepper." His laugh was warm as he approached. "Better than that. It's from the hardware store in town." He set the box down carefully. "Bob mentioned you might want to see what was inside." Emma frowned, kneeling beside the box. Her name was written on a piece of paper taped to the top, along with a note she didn't recognize. As she opened it, her breath caught. Inside were dozens of photographs of cabins, tiny homes, and sustainable building projects. But more surprising were the letters, handwritten notes from people she'd never met. "I don't understand," she murmured, pulling out a letter with shaking hands. Marcus settled beside her on the porch steps. "Word travels fast in small towns. People have been talking about what you've done here, how you've transformed this place. Some folks started asking Bob if they could get your advice on their own projects." Emma read the first letter aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. "Dear Miss McKenna, my husband and I inherited some land outside of town, and we'd love to build something sustainable like what we've heard you created. Would you be willing to look at our plans?" Another letter caught her eye, this one from a young couple wanting to convert an old barn into a home. Then another from someone interested in off-grid living. As she read through them, a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. "There are at least 20 letters in here," she said, amazement coloring her voice. Marcus nodded, his eyes studying her face. "Bob said more come in every few days. People are calling you the cabin lady around town." He paused, then added quietly, "They're impressed by what you've accomplished on your own." The phrase hit her unexpectedly. On your own. 7 months ago, those words would have terrified her. Now they felt like a badge of honor. She had done this alone, had proven to herself that she was capable of more than she'd ever imagined. "I never thought about helping others with their projects," she admitted, carefully placing the letters back in the box. "Back in Portland, I designed houses for people who wanted to show off their wealth. This feels different." "Because it is different," Marcus said. "These people aren't looking for status symbols. They want homes that make sense, that work with the land instead of fighting against it." Emma stood slowly, her hand instinctively moving to her belly as she gazed out at the valley spread below them. The aspens were beginning their autumn transformation, painting streaks of gold across the mountainsides. Soon, winter would test every improvement she'd made to the cabin, every system she'd installed. "I've been so focused on surviving up here, on proving I could make it work," she said thoughtfully. "I hadn't considered that maybe this knowledge could help other people too." Marcus rose beside her. "You've got a gift, Emma. The way you see potential in broken things, the way you make the practical beautiful, that's rare." His words stirred something in her chest, a flutter of possibility that felt as significant as the baby's movements. For the first time since arriving in Montana, she was thinking beyond just her own survival. "What would you think about helping me set up some kind of consulting business?" she asked, turning to face him. "Nothing fancy, just helping people who want to build responsibly." The smile that spread across Marcus's face was answer enough, but he put it into words anyway. "I think it's about time the world got to see what Emma McKenna is really capable of." As the sun began to set behind the mountains, Emma felt something shift inside her. She wasn't just rebuilding her life anymore, she was building something entirely new. The storm hit 3 days before Maya's due date, bringing with it the kind of blizzard that could bury the cabin entirely. She watched through the reinforced windows as snow piled against the glass in angry drifts, the wind howling like something alive and hungry. The power lines she'd run from the solar array to the main cabin flickered once, twice, then held steady, a small miracle she credited to Ethan's careful weatherproofing work. Ethan paced the living room like a caged wolf, checking his phone every few minutes, despite knowing the cell towers were down. He'd driven up 2 days ago with enough supplies to last a month, his truck loaded with medical equipment that Maya hoped they wouldn't need. Dr. Sarah Chen, the midwife from town, had promised to make the journey when labor started, but now even her four-wheel drive couldn't navigate the roads that had become rivers of white. "Maybe we should try to get you to town," Ethan said for the 10th time that morning, peering out at his truck, which was now nothing more than a snow-covered mound in what used to be the driveway. Maya shifted on the couch, one hand resting on her belly where the baby had been unusually quiet all morning. "In what? Your truck is buried, and even if we could dig it out, the road's impassable. We're committed now." The acceptance in her voice seemed to calm him, or perhaps it was the way she smiled when she said it, not the tight, fearful smile of someone trapped, but something warmer. She'd spent months preparing for this possibility, reading everything she could about emergency births, organizing supplies in carefully labeled containers. The woman who had once panicked over a delayed contractor had learned to find peace in preparation. A sharp pain caught her mid-afternoon, different from the practice contractions she'd been having for weeks. This one started low and built like a wave, stealing her breath and making her grip the arm of the chair. Ethan noticed immediately, dropping the firewood he'd been stacking. Was that maybe? Maya breathed through it, counting seconds the way Dr. Chen had taught her. "We'll see if there's another one." 20 minutes later, there was. Then another 15 minutes after that. Maya found herself moving restlessly around the cabin, her body seeking positions that felt right. She paused at the window wall she'd designed, looking out at the storm that had transformed her mountain into an alien landscape. Even through the pain, she felt a deep satisfaction at how solid the cabin felt around them, how the reinforced structure held steady against the wind that would have leveled the original building. "I need to tell you something," she said, during a lull between contractions. Ethan looked up from where he was organizing the medical supplies with military precision. "I'm not scared." He blinked. "You're not?" "I thought I would be. I was terrified of this happening, being cut off, being alone. But I'm not alone, am I?" She gestured around the cabin, and somehow he understood she didn't just mean his presence. She meant the space itself, the home she'd built with her own hands and vision, the mountain that had embraced her when her family cast her out. As evening fell and the contractions grew stronger, Maya labored by the light of the fireplace and the battery-powered lanterns Ethan had strategically placed around the room. She found herself drawn to the bathroom she'd designed with this moment in mind, the wide shower with grab bars, the heated floors, the skylight that would have shown stars on any other night. Ethan proved himself invaluable, following her lead without trying to take control, bringing warm towels and speaking in the low, steady voice that had talked her through panic attacks and breakthrough moments with equal skill. When she needed to lean against something, he became a wall. When she needed space to move, he disappeared into the background like smoke. "The baby's coming," Maya said sometime after midnight, her voice steady despite everything her body was going through. They'd moved to the bedroom where clean sheets and towels were laid out with surgical precision. The storm still raged outside, but it felt distant now, like something happening in another world. Ethan's hands were steady as he helped her, following the steps they'd practiced from Dr. Chen's emergency birth manual. When the baby's head crowned, Maya looked up at the ceiling beam where she'd carved her initials the day she'd decided to stay on the mountain permanently. "Almost there," Ethan whispered, and Maya bore down with everything she had, thinking of foundations and blueprints, of structures that could weather any storm. The baby slipped into the world with a rush that left Maya gasping and laughing at the same time. "It's a girl," Ethan announced unnecessarily, since Maya could see her daughter perfectly, small and red and furious, announcing her arrival to the storm-swept mountain with lungs that promised strength. Outside, the wind began to die down, as if the mountain itself was settling into quiet welcome. The morning sun filtered through the cabin's handcrafted windows as Elena carefully arranged her architectural drawings across the kitchen table. 6 months had passed since she'd first stumbled upon this place, broken and desperate, and now the transformation felt almost miraculous. The crude shelter had evolved into something that breathed with warmth and purpose, every beam and board a testament to her determination to rebuild not just a structure, but herself. Her pregnancy had progressed beautifully in the mountain air. At 7 months, she moved with a careful grace, her hands instinctively resting on her rounded belly as she studied the sketches she'd been working on through the long winter evenings. What had started as therapeutic doodling had become something far more ambitious, plans for expanding the cabin into a proper homestead. The sound of approaching footsteps on the wooden porch made her look up. Through the window, she could see Marcus climbing the steps, his arms laden with supplies from town. Over the past few months, his visits had become a cherished routine, though Elena was careful not to examine too closely what his consistent presence might mean. "Morning," he called out, stamping snow from his boots before entering. "Brought those books you asked for, and Sarah sent along some of her famous apple butter." Elena smiled, grateful for the kindness that seemed to flow so naturally from the small mountain community. When Marcus had first introduced her around town as a friend who'd bought old Henderson's place, nobody had asked uncomfortable questions. They'd simply welcomed her with the practical generosity of people who understood that sometimes folks needed a fresh start. "Any word from the county office about the building permits?" she asked, rolling up one of the drawings to make room for the groceries he was unpacking. Marcus nodded, pulling an official-looking envelope from his jacket pocket. "Came through yesterday. Looks like everything's approved for your addition." Elena's heart raced as she tore open the envelope. The permits represented more than just legal permission to expand. They were validation that she could build something lasting here, something that would be worthy of the child who would soon call this place home. "This is really happening," she whispered, scanning the documents with the eye of someone who'd once navigated far more complex building codes in the city. "Having second thoughts?" Marcus asked, settling into the chair across from her. His dark eyes held that familiar mixture of concern and something deeper that made Elena's pulse quicken. "No," she said firmly. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life. This place, this life, it's exactly what we need." The word "we" hung in the air between them, loaded with unspoken possibilities. Elena had grown accustomed to thinking of herself and the baby as a unit, but lately she'd begun to wonder if that circle might expand to include someone else. As if sensing her thoughts, Marcus reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "Elena, there's something I need to tell you." Her breath caught. Over the months, their friendship had deepened into something that felt both comfortable and electric. Marcus had never pushed, never made her feel like his help came with expectations, but the connection between them had grown undeniable. "I know this might not be the right time," he continued, his thumb tracing gentle circles across her knuckles. "And I know you've got every reason to be cautious about trusting anyone right now, but I can't keep pretending that what I feel for you is just friendship." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. Part of her had been hoping for this moment, while another part feared it. The last time she'd trusted someone with her heart, she'd ended up pregnant and abandoned. But Marcus wasn't James. Every action over the past months had proven that. "Marcus, you don't have to say anything right now," he interrupted gently. "I just needed you to know, whatever happens, whatever you decide, I'm here. For both of you." The baby chose that moment to deliver a particularly enthusiastic kick, and Elena gasped, her hand flying to her side. Marcus was on his feet instantly, concern etched across his features. "It's okay," Elena laughed, catching his hand and pressing it to where their child was moving. "Someone's just making their presence known." The wonder that spread across Marcus's face as he felt the baby's movements nearly brought tears to Elena's eyes. In that moment, she could envision a different future than the one she'd been imagining. Not just her and the baby against the world, but something richer, fuller. "I need time to think," she said softly, not moving his hand away. "Take all the time you need," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "I'll be here." Outside, snow began to fall again, blanketing the mountain in pristine white. But inside the cabin she'd built with her own hands, Elena felt the first stirrings of a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the hearth, and everything to do with the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she was ready to trust again. The storm hit 3 days before Christmas, bringing with it winds that howled through the valley like wounded animals and snow that fell so thick Maya couldn't see the barn from her kitchen window. She'd weathered storms before in her months at the cabin, but nothing like this. The radio crackled warnings about whiteout conditions and temperatures dropping to dangerous lows before cutting to static entirely. Elena pressed her face against the frosted glass, her breath fogging the pain. At 7 months old, she was fascinated by the swirling white chaos outside, babbling and pointing with chubby fingers. Maya pulled her daughter closer, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. The power had gone out that morning, and the backup generator was struggling. Maya had rationed the fuel carefully, but she knew it wouldn't last more than another day. The fireplace would have to carry them through, and she'd need to venture out to the woodshed soon, despite the wind that threatened to knock her off her feet. She was bundling Elena in extra blankets when she heard it, the distant rumble of an engine fighting through the storm. Maya's heart leaped. Only one person would be foolish enough to attempt the mountain roads in these conditions. The knock on her door came 20 minutes later, barely audible over the wind. Maya yanked it open to find Jake covered head to toe in snow, ice crystals clinging to his beard, his truck barely visible behind the wall of white. "You absolute fool," she said, pulling him inside before he could speak. "You could have been killed." Jake stomped his boots and shed his coat, snow melting into puddles on her floor. "Couldn't leave you two up here alone. Weather Service is calling this a 100-year storm." Elena squealed with delight at seeing Jake, reaching her arms toward him. Despite her worry, Maya felt her chest warm as he scooped up her daughter, who immediately began tugging at his frost-dampened hair. "How bad is it down in town?" Maya asked, helping him out of his snow-caked layers. "Bad enough. Main road's closed. Mine's probably the last vehicle that made it up the mountain." His eyes found hers in the firelight. "I brought supplies. Food, extra fuel, medical kit. Figured you might need them." Maya felt tears prick her eyes, not from fear, but from the overwhelming gratitude that seemed to catch her off guard whenever Jake appeared in her life like this. No fanfare, no grand gestures, just quiet certainty that she and Elena mattered enough to risk his safety. They spent the next hour securing the cabin, moving firewood inside and checking the windows for weak points where the wind might find entry. Jake's presence transformed everything. What had felt like a threatening siege now felt almost cozy, like they were holding down a fort together. As evening fell and the storm raged on, they settled by the fire. Elena dozed between them on a pile of blankets, and Maya found herself studying Jake's profile in the dancing light. There was something different about him lately, a new intensity in the way he looked at her, as if he was always on the verge of saying something important, but couldn't quite find the words. "Jake," she said softly, not wanting to wake Elena. "Why did you really come up here?" He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "Because I couldn't stand the thought of you being scared and alone, because I—" He stopped, jaw working like he was chewing on words too big to swallow. Maya's pulse quickened. In the months since Elena's birth, something had been building between them, delicate as spider's silk, but strong enough to change the very air when they were together. She'd felt it in the way his hand lingered when he helped her down from his truck, in how his eyes tracked her movements when he thought she wasn't looking, in the careful distance he maintained as if afraid of overstepping invisible boundaries. "Because what?" she whispered. Before he could answer, a tremendous crack split the air outside, followed by a crash that shook the cabin's walls. They both jumped, Elena stirring but not waking. Jake was on his feet instantly, peering out into the maelstrom. "Tree down," he said grimly. "Big one by the sound. Probably took out the phone lines." Maya joined him at the window, close enough that she could smell the lingering cold on his skin, the familiar scent of sawdust and cedar that seemed to cling to him always. They were truly cut off now, just the three of them against the storm. "How long do you think it'll last?" she asked. Jake's hand found her shoulder, warm and steadying. "Could be days, but we'll be fine. I promise you that." Looking up at him, Maya believed it completely. Not just that they'd survived the storm, but that something fundamental was shifting between them, as inexorable and powerful as the weather itself. The autumn wind carried the scent of snow as Maya stood at the edge of the meadow, watching Elena take her first tentative steps across the grass. At 8 months old, her daughter moved with the determined wobble of someone discovering the world one footfall at a time. Maya's heart swelled with a fierce pride that still caught her off guard sometimes. "She's going to be walking before winter sets in," Jake said, settling beside her on the porch steps. His presence had become as natural as breathing over the past months, though neither of them had put words to what was growing between them. "Good thing the cabin's baby-proofed now," Maya replied, thinking of the rounded corners he'd helped her sand, the cabinet latches they'd installed together. The space that had once been her solitary refuge had evolved into something she'd never expected, a home filled with laughter and the comfortable rhythm of shared purpose. The transformation hadn't been just physical. Maya barely recognized the woman who'd fled to Montana with nothing but hurt and determination. That version of herself seemed like a stranger now, someone who'd mistaken isolation for independence, who'd believed strength meant bearing everything alone. Elena tumbled onto her bottom with a giggle, immediately pushing herself back up to try again. Maya smiled, seeing her own stubborn streak reflected in miniature. "Speaking of winter," Jake said, his tone carefully casual, "I've been thinking about the supply runs. The road's going to be impassable for weeks once the snow really hits." Maya nodded, though something in his voice made her look at him more closely. "We've got everything we need. More than enough food stored, plenty of firewood, the solar panels are working perfectly. We could get snowed in for months." "I know." She'd been counting on it, actually. The idea of being cocooned here with Elena, watching her first winter through her daughter's wondering eyes, felt like a gift rather than a hardship. Jake was quiet for a long moment, watching Elena's determined progress across the meadow. "Maya," he said finally, "what happens after winter?" The question hung between them, like morning mist. Maya felt something shift in her chest, a recognition of the crossroads they'd been approaching without acknowledging it. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he ran a hand through his hair. A gesture she'd learned meant he was wrestling with something important. "This place, what you've built here, it's incredible. It's not just the cabin anymore, is it? It's not just about proving you can survive on your own." Maya's breath caught. He was right, of course. Somewhere along the way, her sanctuary had become something else entirely, a foundation, a beginning rather than an ending. "I've been offered a permanent position," Jake continued, "running the ranger station year-round instead of just seasonally. It would mean staying, really staying." Elena chose that moment to take 3 perfect steps in a row before collapsing in delighted exhaustion. Maya clapped, but her mind was spinning with the implications of Jake's words. "That's wonderful," she said, meaning it. "You love this work." "I do. But that's not why I'm considering it." Their eyes met, and Maya saw her own uncertainty reflected there. The careful boundaries they'd maintained, the unspoken agreement that this was temporary, that they were just helping each other through difficult transitions, suddenly seemed as fragile as autumn leaves. "Jake!" "I know," he said quickly. "I know you came here to figure things out on your own. And you have. Look at what you've accomplished." He gestured toward the cabin, its solar panels glinting in the afternoon sun, the workshop where Maya had been crafting furniture to sell in town, the garden that had fed them through the summer. "You don't need anyone." "No," Maya said softly. "I don't." The admission felt like stepping off a cliff. But maybe that's not the right question anymore. Elena had spotted a butterfly and was crawling after it with single-minded focus, her delighted babbling carrying on the wind. Maya watched her daughter, this brave little person who'd taught her that love could be a source of strength rather than vulnerability. "Maybe the question is what I want," Maya continued, her voice gaining certainty. "Not what I need to prove or what I'm running from, but what I'm running toward." Jake's smile started slow and spread like sunrise. And what's that? Maya looked at the life they'd built together without planning it. The easy mornings over coffee, the shared projects, the way Jake read to Elena while Maya worked on her designs, the thousand small kindnesses that had woven themselves into something precious and unexpected. This, she said simply. I want this. The word hung between them, full of possibility. Maya felt the last of her old fears cracking open like seed pods, releasing something new into the Montana wind. Elena's triumphant squeal drew their attention back to the meadow, where she'd managed to catch her butterfly, or rather, where it had landed trustingly on her outstretched palm. The storm that had been threatening all week finally arrived with a vengeance, rattling the cabin windows and sending snow whirling across the valley in thick, blinding sheets. Maya stood at the kitchen window, watching the white curtain descend over the landscape she'd come to know so intimately. The weathered thermometer outside read 15 below, and the wind chill would make it feel even colder. "Mama, look!" Emma pressed her small hands against the glass, her breath fogging the pain. At 18 months, she was endlessly fascinated by the drama of Montana weather. Her dark curls, so much like Maya's own, bounced as she pointed excitedly at the swirling snow. Maya wrapped her arms around her daughter, pulling her close. The cabin felt solid around them, a fortress against the storm. Every board she'd carefully selected and placed, every chink she'd sealed, every improvement she'd made over the past 2 years now served its purpose. The fire crackled steadily in the hearth, the hand-hewn beams overhead stood strong against the wind's assault, and the root cellar was stocked with enough preserved food to last them weeks if necessary. A sharp knock at the door made them both turn. Maya frowned. No one would be traveling in weather like this unless it was an emergency. She opened the door to find Ben on her porch, snow-covered and shivering, leading his horse by the reins. "Storm caught me on the way back from town," he called over the wind. "Mind if we take shelter?" "Of course." Maya stepped aside, helping him guide the horse into the small stable she'd built adjacent to the cabin. The animal whinnied gratefully as they closed the door against the elements. Inside, Ben stomped his boots and shook snow from his coat while Emma toddled toward him with outstretched arms. Over the months, he'd become a fixture in their lives, helping with repairs, bringing supplies, and sharing quiet evenings by the fire. Maya had tried to convince herself it was just friendship, but the way her heart lifted whenever she saw him made that lie harder to maintain. "Coffee?" she asked, already moving toward the stove. "Please." Ben picked up Emma, who immediately began chattering at him in her mixture of real words and invented language. He nodded seriously at her commentary, as if she were sharing the most important information in the world. Maya watched them together as she prepared the coffee, her chest tight with emotions she wasn't ready to name. This wasn't the life she'd planned, not the pristine suburban existence her parents had mapped out for her, not the corporate success she'd once thought she wanted. This was something entirely different, something she'd built with her own hands from nothing but determination and hope. "Radio says the storm could last 3 days, Ben said, settling Emma on the rug with her wooden blocks, while Maya handed him a steaming mug. "We'll manage." Maya settled beside him on the small sofa she'd found at a yard sale and painstakingly restored. "We always do." He studied her face in the firelight. "You're not the same person who showed up here 2 years ago." Maya considered this. The woman who'd arrived at this cabin had been broken, desperate, fleeing from a life that had crumbled around her. She'd been soft in all the wrong places, unprepared for the harsh realities of wilderness living, sustained only by stubborn pride and a refusal to crawl back to parents who'd written her off. "Neither are you," she said quietly. It was true. The Ben she'd first met had been guarded, carrying his own wounds from a marriage that had ended badly and a trust that had been shattered. Somewhere between teaching her to split wood and fixing her roof, between shared meals and quiet conversations, they'd both found something they hadn't been looking for. Outside, the wind howled with renewed fury, but inside the cabin felt like its own world. Emma had fallen asleep on the rug, her small form curled against a pile of cushions. The fire painted dancing shadows on the walls, illuminating the hand-carved details Maya had added over time, the bookshelves Ben had built, the photographs documenting their small family's growth and adventures. "Maya," Ben said, his voice soft but serious. He set down his coffee and turned to face her fully. "I need to tell you something." Her heart stuttered. In her experience, conversations that started this way rarely ended well. But when she looked into his eyes, she didn't see the careful distance she'd learned to expect from people. She saw warmth, certainty, and something that looked remarkably like love. "I know we've been dancing around this for months," he continued. "I know you have good reasons to be careful, to protect yourself and Emma, but I can't pretend anymore that this is just friendship." The wind outside seemed to pause, waiting for her response. Maya looked around the cabin, her sanctuary, her achievement, her proof that she could build something beautiful from the ruins of her old life. The contractions started just as the first heavy snowflakes began to fall, each one visible in the amber glow of the cabin's windows. Maya gripped the kitchen counter, breathing through the wave of pain that rolled across her belly like thunder over the mountains. 6 weeks early wasn't ideal, but the baby had other plans. "Marcus," she called, her voice steady despite the flutter of panic in her chest. He appeared from the workshop where he'd been installing the last of the custom shelving, sawdust still clinging to his flannel shirt. One look at her face told him everything. He crossed the room in 3 strides, his hands immediately finding her shoulders. How far apart? 8 minutes, maybe less. Another contraction gripped her, and she leaned into his strength, grateful for the solid warmth of him. The snow's getting heavier. They both knew what that meant. The road down the mountain became treacherous quickly in weather like this, and the hospital was 45 minutes away in good conditions. Marcus pulled out his phone, but Maya could tell from his expression that the service was spotty. "I'll get the truck ready," he said. But even as the words left his mouth, they could hear the wind picking up outside, rattling the windows she'd so carefully restored. Maya moved to the window, watching the snow fall with increasing intensity. The trees were already disappearing into white curtains of precipitation. "Marcus, I don't think we're going anywhere tonight." The reality settled between them, like the snow settling on the ground outside. They were alone, 40 miles from the nearest neighbor, with a baby who had decided tonight was the night to make an entrance into the world. "Okay," Marcus said, and his calm surprised her. "Okay, we can do this. People have been having babies without hospitals for thousands of years." Maya almost laughed despite another contraction building. "That's your pep talk? I'm working on it." He was already moving, his hands gentle as he guided her toward the bedroom. "What do you need me to do?" As if summoned by their crisis, Maya's phone managed to catch a weak signal. She fumbled for it, calling Dr. Peterson's emergency line. The connection was scratchy, cutting in and out, but she managed to explain their situation. "Snowstorm, baby's coming, can't get to hospital." Dr. Peterson's voice came through in fragments. "Normal delivery, clean towels, boil water, call if complications." The line went dead. Maya looked at Marcus, who had gone slightly pale but was already rolling up his sleeves. "Clean towels and boiled water. I can handle that." The next few hours blurred together in waves of intensity and strange, quiet moments between contractions. Marcus proved to be exactly the partner she needed, anticipating her needs before she voiced them, his presence a steady anchor as her body did what it was designed to do. He held her hand when she needed grounding, gave her space when she needed to move, and never once let his own nervousness show. The cabin itself seemed to embrace them, the walls Maya had so carefully restored, holding them safe while the storm raged outside. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows that felt protective rather than ominous. This place that had been her refuge was now becoming the birthplace of her child, and something about that felt exactly right. "I can see the head," Marcus said, his voice filled with wonder and terror in equal measure. "Maya, you're doing it. You're really doing it." She bore down with the next contraction, every muscle in her body focused on this single purpose. The pain was incredible, but so was the power she felt coursing through her. This was primal, fundamental, the most basic magic in the world happening right here in her transformed sanctuary. And then, with a rush that left her breathless, the baby slipped into Marcus's waiting hands. The silence that followed lasted only a heartbeat before a strong, indignant cry filled the cabin. "It's a girl," Marcus whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He lifted the tiny, perfect creature, and Maya saw tears streaming down his cheeks. "She's beautiful, Maya. She's absolutely perfect." Maya reached for her daughter, this little person who had chosen to make her entrance during a Montana blizzard, in a cabin her mother had rebuilt from nothing. As the baby settled against her chest, Maya felt something shift inside her, a final piece of herself clicking into place. This was where she'd found home. The baby's crying softened to contented murmurs, and Maya felt Marcus settle beside them on the bed, his arm coming around both of them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions, new adventures. But tonight, in this moment, they were complete. The first contraction hit Clara while she was sketching blueprints for the new guest cabin at the kitchen table. The pencil clattered to the floor as she gripped the edge of the wooden surface, her breath catching in her throat. Outside, snow fell in thick, lazy flakes, blanketing the world in pristine white. "It's too early," she whispered to herself, pressing a hand to her rounded belly. The baby wasn't due for another 3 weeks. The pain subsided, leaving her wondering if it had been real. She retrieved her pencil and tried to focus on the drawings, but another wave rolled through her 20 minutes later, stronger this time. Clara's hands trembled as she reached for her phone, checking the signal bars. One flickering bar, barely enough for a call if she was lucky. She dialed Marcus first. The call went straight to voicemail. He was probably deep in the forest, helping a research team document winter wildlife patterns. The nearest hospital was 40 miles away in Whitefish, and with the storm intensifying, the winding mountain roads would be treacherous. Another contraction gripped her, lasting nearly a minute. Clara paced the cabin's main room, breathing through the pain as she'd learned in the childbirth classes she'd driven to town for each week. Between contractions, she gathered supplies, clean towels, bottled water, the emergency medical kit Marcus had insisted they keep stocked. She tried calling Dr. Morrison next, managing to connect long enough to describe what was happening before the call dropped. In those precious seconds, she heard him say, "Don't panic," and something about timing the contractions. But then the line went dead. The wind howled around the cabin, rattling the windows Clara had carefully restored. She found herself taking comfort in the solid walls she'd rebuilt, the sturdy roof that had sheltered her through 2 seasons of storms. This place had become her sanctuary, and perhaps it would be where her child entered the world. When Marcus finally burst through the front door 3 hours later, shaking snow from his coat, he found Clara on the living room floor surrounded by pillows and blankets she'd arranged near the fireplace. "The baby's coming," she said simply, then gritted her teeth as another contraction began. His face went pale beneath his winter tan. "Now? But we planned—" "Plans change." Clara managed a weak smile. "I can't make it to the hospital. The contractions are 5 minutes apart, and this storm—" Marcus knelt beside her, his calloused hands gentle as they found hers. "Okay, we can do this. I've helped deliver calves, and I got through to Doc Morrison on the radio. He's going to talk us through it. Comparing me to a cow right now probably isn't your best move." Clara gasped, but she squeezed his hands gratefully. The next few hours blurred together in waves of pain and anticipation. Marcus proved to be an anchor of calm strength, following Dr. Morrison's crackling radio instructions while keeping Clara focused on her breathing. He heated water, prepared clean surfaces, and spoke to her in the steady, reassuring voice that had first drawn her to him. "Tell me about the guest cabin," he said during a brief respite between contractions. "What did you decide about the windows?" Clara understood what he was doing, giving her mind something else to focus on. Floor to ceiling on the south wall, she panted, and a wraparound deck to catch the morning light on the peaks. Sounds perfect, just like you planned. When the final stage of labor began, Clara drew strength from everything around her. The warmth of the fire she'd learned to build, the solid floor of the cabin she'd restored with her own hands, the man who'd taught her that love could be both gentle and fierce. This wasn't the sterile hospital room she'd envisioned, but it felt right. At 11:47 p.m., with the storm still raging outside, Clara's daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that filled the cabin's rafters. Marcus caught the tiny, perfect child with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face as he placed her on Clara's chest. "She's beautiful," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "She's absolutely perfect." Clara gazed down at her daughter, dark hair plastered to her small head, eyes squeezed shut as she announced her presence to the world. In that moment, surrounded by the walls she'd rebuilt and held by the man who'd helped her rebuild herself, Clara felt the last piece of her new life click into place. "Welcome home, little one," she murmured, pressing a kiss to her daughter's forehead. Through the window, the snow continued to fall, but inside the cabin, 3 hearts beat in peaceful rhythm. Clara had lost everything. Her family, her old life, her carefully laid plans. But sitting here with her daughter in her arms and Marcus's love surrounding them both, she finally understood that sometimes the best foundations are built from the rubble of what came before. The morning sun cast long shadows across the meadow as Maya stepped onto the cabin's front porch, her 6-month-old daughter Emma nestled against her chest in a hand-woven carrier. The transformation of this place still amazed her. From the crumbling ruin she'd discovered 8 months ago to the thriving homestead it had become. Solar panels gleamed on the reinforced roof, the vegetable garden sprawled in organized abundance, and the workshop she'd built hummed with the sound of Jake's woodworking. "Ready for the big day?" Jake emerged from the workshop, sawdust in his dark hair, carrying a beautifully carved wooden sign. The words "Wildwood Retreat" were etched in elegant script, surrounded by intricate mountain laurel designs. Maya traced the letters with her fingertip. "It's perfect, just like everything else you've made for this place." Their eyes met over Emma's sleeping form, and Maya felt that familiar flutter in her chest. Over the past months, as they'd worked side by side rebuilding not just the cabin but their lives, something deeper had grown between them. It wasn't the desperate attraction of her former life, but something steady and real, built on shared dreams and quiet moments. A car engine rumbled up the winding dirt road, followed by another, then another. Maya's stomach tightened with nervous excitement. Today marked the official opening of Wildwood Retreat, the sustainable architecture workshop and wilderness sanctuary she'd envisioned during those lonely early weeks. What had started as her personal refuge was now ready to welcome others seeking their own transformation. The first car pulled up, a hybrid sedan that looked oddly out of place among the towering pines. Maya's breath caught as she recognized the driver stepping out. Her sister Caroline, immaculately dressed even for the wilderness, glanced around with undisguised uncertainty. "Maya?" Caroline's voice carried across the clearing, tentative and small. Maya hadn't spoken to her family since the day they'd cut her off, when her father had declared her pregnancy an embarrassment to the Montgomery name. She'd sent Caroline a letter about the retreat opening, never expecting anyone to actually come. "You came," Maya said simply, walking down the porch steps. Caroline's composure cracked. "I've been trying to find the courage to reach out for months. When I got your letter," she gestured helplessly at the transformed landscape. "Maya, this is incredible. You built all this?" "We built it," Maya corrected, reaching back to take Jake's hand. "Caroline, meet Jake Thompson. And this is Emma." Caroline's eyes widened as she peered at the baby's peaceful face. "She's beautiful. She has your eyes, but her chin—" Caroline's voice broke. "Oh, Maya, we were such fools." More cars arrived. Architects from Seattle interested in sustainable design, a family from Denver seeking to disconnect from city life, a young couple hoping to build their own off-grid home. As Maya welcomed each group, explaining her vision of architecture that worked with nature rather than against it, she felt a confidence she'd never possessed in her old life. Jake had set up demonstrations of traditional building techniques, while Maya led tours of the passive solar design features she'd incorporated. The root cellar carved into the hillside, the rainwater collection system, the composting toilets that had seemed so daunting in those early days, everything had become part of a cohesive whole. "You're different," Caroline said during a quiet moment, as they watched participants sketching design ideas around the outdoor workshop space Jake had constructed from fallen timber. "Everything's different," Maya replied, adjusting Emma's hat against the mountain breeze. "I used to design buildings that fought against their environment, imposing someone else's idea of what belonged. Now I help people find what actually fits." "Mother and father ask about you," Caroline said quietly. "They're too proud to admit they were wrong, but they ask." Maya considered this. The anger that had sustained her through the hardest days had gradually transformed into something closer to pity. Her parents lived in golden cages of their own making, terrified of anything that might tarnish their carefully constructed image. "Tell them they're welcome here," Maya said finally. "Not to rescue me or fix anything, but to see what I've built. What we've built." As the afternoon progressed, Maya found herself surrounded by eager students, their notebooks filled with sketches and questions. A documentary filmmaker wanted to feature the retreat in a series about sustainable living. 3 couples had already signed up for next month's intensive workshop. That evening, after the visitors had departed, and Caroline had reluctantly returned to her hotel in town, Maya and Jake sat on the porch swing he'd crafted from reclaimed cedar. Emma nursed contentedly while they watched stars emerge in the vast Montana sky. "No regrets?" Jake asked softly, his arm tightening around Maya's shoulders. Maya thought about the penthouse she'd once called home, the prestigious firm where she'd worked, the inheritance she'd forfeited. Then she looked at this place they'd created together, wild and beautiful and entirely their own. "None," she whispered, and meant it completely.